And then I said, I like horror games, and I'm also a musician, why not play Song of Horror? This is a game that's currently going into the last phases of its Kickstarter campaign. Its goal is 50,000 euros, and it's sitting around 28,000, actually a little more than 28,000 euros as of this recording. This is the result of a Spanish developer called Protocol Games. They've got it greenlit on Steam, and they have a publisher who will get it to PS4 and Xbox One if it gets funded. As you can see, we're at the Husher Mansion because we're playing as a guy named Daniel Neuer, who's a really, low-rung guy at a publishing house, and they want him to go and find out what's happened to their biggest client, a writer named Sebastian P. Husher, because he hasn't been heard from in weeks. We find the front door left open, and now we're exploring around to try and figure out what happened to Sebastian and his family. This game is very exploration heavy and involves a lot of looking at various pieces of the environment, interacting with things, and interacting with items which you can then inspect. Because you can just look at the items normally, but then you can also rotate them around and look for other little details about them. It's also worth noting that depending on who you play as, you might get different results when interacting with certain items. I should clarify when I say that Daniel here is the main plotline of the game, and then there are, I think, 15 other characters they're planning to put in, and you can choose one of them to go as through the rest of the game on the side, but if one of those characters dies, the game has permadeath, so they're gone, and that affects the end of the game. Just from what you've seen so far, you might not be surprised that the creators of this have cited games like Resident Evil and Silent Hill as some of their inspirations. I know, big shocker, game that starts off in a mansion has Resident Evil for inspiration. But anyway, if the controls look a little weird, it's largely because I'm playing this with a keyboard instead of a controller. While you're moving around, you can not just move yourself around, you can also use the mouse to move around the flashlight and look at different objects as you're standing still or as you're moving around. And you can use that to interact with items that you aren't necessarily lined up perfectly with. Although there were a couple of times in this demo where the flashlight was moving opposite of the way that I wanted it to move. It's probably just a bug with the demo. Speaking of the demo, it might not surprise you that because this is a game made by a Spanish developer, not all of the dialogue is in English, even though this is supposed to be the English version. When you get later into it, some of the dialogue is just straight Spanish. Most of it's pretty intuitive because Spanish and English aren't actually that different of languages, but sometimes it can be a little tricky to figure out what exactly the game wants you to do because of that. Anyway, getting back to the gameplay a little more. Something I really like about this, the complete lack of a HUD. Nothing gets in the way of the experience. And you might wonder why there isn't a HUD, and it's because there's no health bar, there's no health in general, there aren't any weapons, and as the developer said on the Kickstarter page, there's no enemies in the traditional sense. Rather, what you're dealing with in this game is something called the presence. And by dealing with, I mean avoiding as much as you can. The presence is this shadowy, amoebic void sort of thing with tendrils that vaguely resemble arms that sometimes extend out of it to try to grab you. And you're going to be dealing with it throughout the game. And you can't deal with it the way that you would traditional, AI for enemies. Because what it does largely depends on how much you make your presence known throughout the house. According to the developers themselves, the presence will sometimes just try to mess with your senses, it'll sometimes play around with you, it sometimes just has its own moods that it gets into about whether it wants to mess with you or not. Some things are preset, and some things just develop procedurally as you go on. And as I played through the demo a few times, there were some things that weren't happening the same way when I played through it, each successive time. For example, there was this one room where I got grabbed and killed. And then I went back to that area later, went through the same area, and I didn't die. There was another time I went through this one hallway where the presence was trying to bust through this door and I was trying to hold it off. And then I went through it on another playthrough and the presence wasn't there at all. And the end result of all this is that you end up being very careful about everything you're doing and everywhere you're going through this game. You're very careful not to make too much noise running, because that might alert the presence. You're careful about turning on too many lights, because maybe that'll tell it where you are. You're careful about if the presence might just be on the other side of a door in the hallway, so, and this is a key feature of the game, you can put your ear against a door and listen to what's on the other side. For example, this is what I hear on the other side of a door where I know it's safe to go inside. And this is what I heard on the other side of a door where the presence caught me. So it's not a complete crapshoot where the presence is just going to go, haha, got you, and there was nothing you could do about it. There is something you can do about it. This is just one of those games where you're really not supposed to rush through everything. You have to take your time and think about what you're doing. As for visuals, there are some kind of janky animations here and there. Like sometimes when you open up a door with this character, the flashlight will teleport from facing one way to the other way in his hands. And sometimes if you are opening one of those double doors, the flashlight will teleport from facing backwards in his right hand to facing forward in his left hand. And it just looks really weird to see the light suddenly shift around like that if you have the flashlight on. Other than that, there is one thing I should warn you about in this game. Be careful if you enter this double-doored room next to the dining area, because the first time I walked into it, I found a document, and then I found some matches, and I tried to leave, and I couldn't get through this door. I never got the prompt to open it. I would hit open, I would try to listen against the door, nothing would happen. Another weird thing is, in this same room, there's supposed to be a single door in that corner. I'm going to show you what this room looks like in a different shot. Here, there's supposed to be this door, but for whatever reason, it didn't show up the first time I went into this room, and I wound up having to restart the demo entirely. Fortunately, this is near the beginning of the demo, so I didn't lose a whole lot of progress. Other than that, if you're interested, I'll leave a link to the Kickstarter in the description, and to Protocol Games, buena suerte.